So we're on to our very last screencast of the unit. This unit, Indicators of Economic Performance, and this one is about inflation. And in this one, we're going to go back to that idea of a price index that I introduced to you a few screencasts ago, and hopefully that'll make that whole price index idea make a lot more sense as we talk about inflation and what that means. Alright, so what is inflation? Along with GDP and unemployment, it's the third of our three main measures of how the economy is doing. Defined, it's a general rising level of prices in the economy. If you've ever sat around your grandparents' knee and heard them whine about how expensive things are now and how movies cost 5 cents in their day and how cars used to cost $12 and how you can buy a slice of pizza for 2 cents, then you know exactly what inflation is. Now, when we measure inflation, that rule of 70 that you learned about still applies. We can figure out how long it's going to take prices to double by using that rule of 70. So for example, if I tell you that prices are rising by 5% a year, that inflation is happening at 5% a year, if we took the number 70 and divided it by 5, that would give us, oh god, 14? I don't know. Cornell University didn't really help me out that much. But, you know, it would tell us how many years it took the economy to double. Hold on, I gotta check that now. 70 divided by 5. Thank you, Cornell. 14. Alright, so the rule of 70 applies. Now, we calculate inflation using a price index. And again, we're going to get back to that concept right now. So here's what the price index thing is all about. It's a general measure of prices in the economy. And the way we calculate a price index is by picking any year, doesn't matter what year it is, and calling it the base year. We assign the base year a price index equal to 100. And that base year becomes our standard measuring stick to measure prices in every other year. To figure out the price index in any other year, let's say year X, we take the prices in year X, we divide it by the prices of things in the base year, and we multiply that by 100. And we're going to get a number. If that number is greater than 100, it means that prices have gone up. And if that number is less than 100, it means that prices have gone down relative to the base year. Alright, so I'm going to take you through an example to show you how this works, and it's useful to really follow this example closely because I don't think there's really a way to understand price indices without doing so. So let's assume that there's only 3 goods produced in the US economy. That last year, for example, we made 1 hat, 1 candle, and 1 lamp. Alright, the way we would calculate a price index is by going shopping for those 3 goods, and let's do that for 3 different years. So let's say we took a shopping cart, went down to the store, and in 1970, 1990, and the year 2010, we bought 1 hat, 1 candle, and 1 lamp. Let's say the prices of those things look like that. So we go shopping in each of those years, we throw each of those things in our shopping cart, and there are the prices for those goods. Now you'll notice that some prices go up and some prices go down. So the hat, for example, goes up in price. The candle goes up as well, but notice that the lamp drops in price from 1970 to 1990 and then goes back up in price. What we're after is a general trend in prices, and that's what a price index does for us. What a price index is going to do is show us generally, are prices generally going up or are they generally going down? And it's going to eliminate this problem of different prices for different things going in different directions. It's going to give us an overall sense of what's happening to prices. So what we would do first is figure out exactly what this stuff cost in each of those 3 years. So I'm going to add up those prices, and that's what the total numbers are. And you could see that things are getting generally more expensive. More expensive in 2010 than they were in 1990. Same with 1990 compared to the year 1970. Alright, so let's start constructing a price index. To calculate a price index, again, the first thing we do is pick any year, call it the base year, and assign it a price index of 100. So just for the sake of this example, I'm going to pick 1990 and call that our base year. That's going to be our standard measuring stick for prices. Price index in 1990 will be 100 by definition. The base year always gets a price index of 100. To calculate the price index for 1970, we're going to use the formula. We're going to take the prices in 1970, divide it by the prices in the base year, and multiply that by 100. And when we do that, we get a price index of 84.4. Here are the prices in 1970, $27. Here's the price in the base year, $32. Multiplied by 100 gives us 84.4. The fact that that 84.4 is lower than 100 means to me that prices were generally lower in 1970 than they were in 1990. In fact, they were only 84.4% of what the prices were in the year 1990. Now, it's easy to see in this example that prices have gone up generally, but when we're talking about millions or tens of millions of goods, you could see why a price index might be important. To do the same thing, there we go. To do the same thing for 2010, you're going to use the same formula. So I'm going to suggest that you try it out. Pause the video, see if you can use the formula, see if you can get the price index for the year 2010. Pause, unpause, there's the answer, 165.6. And if you got that answer, you know how to calculate a price index. Again, what that number is telling me, given the fact that it's greater than 100, is that prices generally were higher in the year 2010 than they were in 1990. And again, it's kind of easy to see that in a 3-good example, but when we're talking about millions of goods, it would be very hard to see that without actually calculating a price index. Alright, well now there's a couple different kinds of price indices you need to know about depending on what we're measuring the prices of. The most important price index is called the Consumer Price Index, sometimes abbreviated CPI. And this is a measure of prices of things that consumers tend to buy. Things like clothes, food, that kind of stuff. So if we want to get a sense of what's happening to prices that consumers feel, we use the Consumer Price Index. If we want to get a sense of the prices of things that businesses tend to buy, we use what's called the Producer Price Index. And that measures the prices of things like machines, robots, computers, factories, that kind of stuff. Again, just a different kind of price index where we would be throwing different things into our shopping cart to get a different measure for different people. Now, if we want an overall sense of what's going on with prices in the economy, we'll use the most general level of price index, which is called the GDP price deflator. You can think of this as a measure of the prices of every single thing in the economy. Stuff that consumers buy, stuff that producers buy, stuff that we all buy. And this is typically the price index used when we want to get the most general, overviewed sense, if that's a word, and it's not, of what's going on with prices in the economy. Well, now that you know what inflation is and how it's measured, we're going to talk about what causes inflation. Now there's two basic causes of inflation, and they both have names. They're called demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Let's deal with demand pull inflation first. And to do this, it's best to go back to a graph we saw back in microeconomics. Demand pull inflation happens when demand increases, when people try to spend more money, when consumers or businesses increase their spending. You could think of it as an analogy to a demand shift to the right in microeconomics. When demand increases, prices tend to go up. So if people try to spend money at a faster and faster rate, we're going to see prices start to go up in the economy. That's coming from people's spending, and we call that demand pull inflation. Consumers are pulling prices up with their increased spending and their increased demand. The other kind of inflation, which we could also understand going back to a microeconomic graph, is called cost push inflation. This happens when supply decreases, when it becomes harder or more expensive to produce. If supply decreases, again, prices go up, and the idea here is that producers are kind of pushing those higher prices down onto consumers. So let's say, for example, that hurricanes destroy orange crops throughout the United States, which would lead to a decrease in the supply of oranges. That would cause an increase in price, and that increase in price would also be paid by consumers, But it's not happening because consumers are trying to spend more money. It's happening because supply has been restricted in some way. And again, that's called cost-push inflation. Alright, now let's talk about some of the effects of inflation. One of the effects of inflation is that it alters nominal income. Again, you'll remember what the word nominal means. Nominal means in name only. And nominal income is the income you're receiving in your paycheck. We went through this briefly back in microeconomics. So the number on your paycheck is your nominal income. And you'll remember that we distinguish that from your real income, what your money can actually buy. So if you're making $1,000 a week, and then prices, for example, double, your nominal income hasn't changed, but your real income, what your paycheck could actually buy, has changed. So inflation tends to make real incomes drop. Nominal incomes may not change, but real incomes do. And again, we can use the same nominal to real formula we used to translate nominal GDP into real GDP to translate nominal income into real income. Here's an example. Let's assume that the year 2012 is the base year, and let's say that you earned $50,000 that year. Let's say that in 2013, prices double compared to 2012. So the price index would be 200, doubling of prices in the year 2013. But let's say your paycheck still says $50,000. So at first blush, it doesn't really look like your income has changed, right? You're still earning $50,000. But let's look at what happened to your real income. Here's the formula again, to translate any nominal number into a real number. To get a real number, you take the nominal number, you divide it by the price index, and multiply that by 100. So your real income would be your nominal income of $50,000 divided by the price index, which is 200, times 100, which would give us $25,000. If prices double, that's essentially the same thing as if prices hadn't changed, but your income got cut in half. Inflation makes real incomes drop. Like I said. Alright, so that's obviously a bad thing. And how bad it is kind of depends on whether people know inflation is coming or not. If people can predict that inflation is coming, we call that anticipated inflation. They see it coming. If they can't predict that it's coming, we call that unanticipated inflation, and that's worse. Because if you know that inflation is coming, you can make adjustments for that. For example, if I know that prices are going to rise 3% next year, I can go to my employer and I could say to my employer, hey, they're predicting price rises of 3%. You have to pay me 3% more. If my employer does that, then I'll be equally well off next year as I am this year. On the other hand, if I don't know about that and I don't negotiate a pay raise, I'm going to see my real income go down as a result of that unanticipated inflation. So we're going to distinguish between people that are hurt by unanticipated inflation, and there are actually some people that benefit from unanticipated inflation. This might be a memorization thing for you, but if you can understand it conceptually, that'd be even better. So people that are hurt by unanticipated inflation include people who received fixed incomes. Let's say that you have retired and you get $200 a month from your pension, and that $200 never changes. Or let's say that you were divorced and you get $300 a month in alimony, or maybe $500 a month in child support, and that number never changes. If the amount of income you receive is fixed and inflation happens, you're kind of screwed, because those dollars aren't worth as much since prices are rising. For similar reasons, people who save money tend to be hurt by inflation. If you have $10,000 in the bank, that's great. But if prices go up by 100%, that $10,000 becomes worth a lot less. So savers tend to be hurt by unanticipated inflation. And then finally, creditors, lenders, are hurt by unanticipated inflation. Imagine it. Let's say that the year is 1900 and you ask me to borrow $1. Well, $1 was pretty powerful in the year 1900. It could buy a lot of stuff. So if I lent you that dollar in the year 1900, and then prices have risen as they have up to the year the current year, and you pay me back $1 this year, the dollar that you're paying me back is worth a lot less, can't really buy much, right? Pack of gum maybe, than it was worth back in the year 1900. So creditors, lenders tend to be hurt by unanticipated inflation. For similar but opposite reasons, there are certain people that are helped by unanticipated inflation. If you owe people money, you like inflation. I would love to borrow $1 from you in the year 1900 and pay you back this year. Right? I'm paying you back $1 that's worth a lot less than the dollar I borrowed over 100 years ago. Alright, now there are some people that are unaffected by unanticipated inflation, and these tend to be people who have made adjustments to deal with inflation. So going back to those alimony or child support or pension examples, if you adjust those for cost of living, if you say that you get $200 a month in alimony adjusted for inflation, cost of living adjustment, then you'll be equally well off. If prices go up by 5%, you'll get 5% more. If prices go up by 10%, you'll get 10% more. So lenders, for example, who factor inflation into the interest rate they charge will also be compensated for changes in prices. I'll give you an example. Let's say that you're a lender and you want to charge 5% interest. That's what you really want to earn. But let's say you also know that inflation is happening at 6%. Prices are rising at 6%. If you want to really earn 5% interest, you're going to have to charge a higher interest rate to account for that inflation. So when someone borrows money from you as a lender, instead of charging 5%, you'll charge 11%. By charging 11% interest, you'll cover the fact that inflation is happening, and you'll really earn your 5% interest rate. Nominal equals real plus inflation, or real equals nominal minus inflation. Now, last thing for this screencast, hyperinflation. If you understood what I've been talking about, you might see how this thing called hyperinflation might happen. Now, hyperinflation is kind of like runaway inflation, and it's happened historically over time. Perhaps the best kind of recent example is Germany between World War I and World War II. Germany, as a result of World War I, owed other countries all these war reparation money. And they didn't have the money to actually pay it. So what they did was started to print out lots more money. They just printed out bills and bills and bills, and they gave them to the German people. Well, the German people took those bills and bills and bills, and they started spending that. That's demand pull inflation. And that caused prices to go up. And in fact, prices were going up so fast in Germany during the 1930s that people were taking wheelbarrows full of money to go buy things like a loaf of bread. People were taking German marks, their money, and using them as wallpaper, because the money was actually worth more as wallpaper than it was worth as money. In fact, money was becoming so valueless, and prices were rising so fast, that if you went out to lunch in Germany between World War I and World War II, they didn't give you a menu with prices on them, because the prices would actually rise in the time it took you to eat the meal. Prices would be different at the end of the meal than they would be at the beginning of the meal. That's called hyperinflation. And it happens because as money becomes less worthless, less valuable, people get this incentive to spend their money quickly. If prices are going up and the dollar bill you're holding in your hand is becoming worth less and less, you have an incentive to spend that money as fast as you possibly can. But of course, that just causes more demand pull inflation, and it's kind of like a vicious spiral. So let me show you the example of Zimbabwe, and what's happened to the currency of Zimbabwe and what it's worth. This is a little graph of the exchange rate between Zimbabwean dollars and US dollars. And yes, you could see on that vertical axis, those are 10 to exponent powers. In other words, it took 10 to the 31 power of Zimbabwean dollars to equal $1 by the time they got done with their runaway inflation. Talk more about this in class, but this is what could happen if inflation is uncontrolled. Alright, that is it for this unit. The 3 indicators of economic performance: GDP, unemployment, inflation. Understand what they are, understand how they're calculated, and understand why they matter. Awesome.
So is it any wonder people are afraid of technology?
Technology!